The silence of space was broken by a weak signal that reached the human ship UES Harmony as it traveled through the outer edges of the Kepler 442 system. Commander Jake Sullivan was reviewing supply reports when his communications officer looked up with concern on her face. The signal was unlike anything they had heard before, filled with strange harmonics and frequencies that seemed to pulse with desperate energy. Captain Lisa Martinez hurried to the communications station. She was the ship's expert on alien languages, and her face grew pale as she began to decode the message. The sounds were coming from the Zephyrians, a peaceful race of water-dwelling beings who lived on the planet below. Lisa had studied their culture for years and knew they communicated through patterns of light that danced across their translucent skin. The message was heartbreaking. The Zephyrians were crying out to anyone who might listen, begging for help against an enemy that was destroying their world. For 3 months, the Vorkath Empire had been attacking their planet, turning their beautiful underwater cities into ruins. The Zephyrians had never known war before, and they were helpless against the brutal assault. Jake listened as Lisa translated the alien words. The Zephyrians spoke of their children swimming in poisoned waters, of ancient cities that had stood for thousands of years now crumbling under enemy fire. They had sent messages to every corner of the galaxy, hoping someone would come to their aid, but no one had answered. Their hope was fading with each passing day. The Vorkath were insects, massive creatures with hard shells and acidic weapons that could melt through almost anything. They had come to the Zephyrian world not for conquest but for the rare minerals buried deep beneath the ocean floor. Admiral Ryan Porter, the Vorkath commander, had given the Zephyrians a simple choice: surrender everything or watch their world burn. Jake's small diplomatic ship was no match for a Vorkath fleet. The Harmony carried only basic weapons and a crew of 50 humans, whose job was to maintain peaceful relations with alien races. They were explorers and diplomats, not warriors. But as Jake listened to the Zephyrian message, he felt something stir in his chest that had nothing to do with military strategy or political treaties. The Zephyrians described their world as it had been before the Vorkath arrived. Great coral cities spiraled up from the ocean floor, glowing with bioluminescent art that told stories of peace and wonder. Gardens of sea plants swayed in gentle currents while Zephyrian families swam together, their skin patterns creating conversations of light and color. It was a civilization built on beauty and harmony, where violence was unknown and war was just a concept from ancient legends. Now that world was dying. The Vorkath had poisoned the oceans with chemical weapons, turning the clear blue waters into a toxic soup that burned Zephyrian skin. Their massive ships hovered above the planet like dark storms, raining destruction on anything that moved below. Millions of Zephyrians had already died, and millions more would follow if no one came to help them. Lisa finished translating the message and looked at Jake with tears in her eyes. The final words of the Zephyrian plea were simple but devastating. We believed no one would answer, but we call out anyway, hoping that somewhere in the vast darkness, someone will hear us and remember that we existed. Jake stared at the communication screen for a long moment. He thought about his duty as a diplomatic officer, about the rules that governed human contact with alien species, about the fact that Earth had no formal alliance with the Zephyrians. He thought about the Vorkath fleet waiting in the system, with enough firepower to destroy his ship in seconds. Then he thought about the children swimming in poisoned water, about ancient cities turning to dust, about an entire species facing extinction, while the galaxy remained silent. Jake reached for the communication controls and opened a channel on all frequencies. His voice was steady as he spoke into the void. This is Commander Jake Sullivan of the United Earth Coalition vessel Harmony. We have received your message and we want you to know that you are not alone. Help is coming. The words seemed to hang in space around them. Lisa gasped and the rest of the bridge crew turned to stare at their commander. They all knew what those words meant. Jake had just committed Earth to war against one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, and he had done it without permission from anyone. But as the silence stretched on, something incredible happened. A new signal came through the communications array, this one filled with patterns of light so beautiful that even the humans could sense their meaning. The Zephyrians were singing, their voices joining together in a harmony that spoke of hope returning to a dying world. Jake smiled as he listened to their song. He knew that he had probably just started the biggest fight in human history. He knew that Earth Command would be furious when they learned what he had done. He knew that the Vorkath would not simply let them leave the system now that they had declared their intentions, but he also knew that somewhere below them, Zephyrian children had just learned that they were not alone in the universe. Their call for help had been heard, and someone was coming to answer it. For Jake Sullivan and the crew of the Harmony, that was enough to make whatever came next worthwhile. The Vorkath response came within hours. Admiral Ryan Porter's voice crackled across the communication channel, filled with the clicking and buzzing sounds of insect speech. His message was simple and brutal. Any ship that interfered with Vorkath operations would be destroyed without warning. Jake looked at his crew and saw determination in every face. They were 50 humans in a small ship, facing an empire that controlled hundreds of worlds. But they had given their word to a dying species and they would not break it. The battle for the Zephyrian world was about to begin. The message from Commander Jake Sullivan reached Earth Command in less than 6 hours, traveling through the quantum communication network that connected human colonies across the galaxy. Fleet Admiral Carol Wright was having her morning coffee when the priority alert flashed across her desk screen, and the hot liquid went cold in her cup as she read the words that would change everything. The conference room filled quickly with the most important people in Earth's military structure. General Chris Morgan arrived first, his face grim as he pulled up tactical displays of the Kepler 442 system. Dr. Ben Adams hurried in next, carrying thick files about Zephyrian culture and biology. Behind him came Admiral Tony Garcia from Luna Base, still wearing his work clothes from the shipyards where he had been overseeing repairs to the Mars defense. Fleet. Carol Wright stood at the head of the table and activated the holographic display that showed the current situation. The Vorkath Empire controlled over 800 warships, each one larger and more heavily armed than anything in Earth's fleet. Their technology was advanced beyond human understanding in some areas, particularly their energy shields and planet-cracking weapons. General Morgan spoke first, his voice heavy with concern. The United Earth Coalition had always followed a defensive strategy, protecting human colonies and trade routes, but never seeking conflict with major alien powers. Earth's entire active fleet numbered only 200 ships, and most of those were patrol vessels and cargo escorts designed for police work rather than full-scale warfare. Dr. Adams argued passionately for intervention, pulling up images of Zephyrian art and culture that he had studied for decades. He showed them recordings of Zephyrian music, patterns of light that told stories of peace and wonder. These were not primitive beings or aggressive warriors, he explained, but philosophers and artists who had never known violence until the Vorkath arrived. The debate raged for hours as more reports came in from the Kepler 442 system. Lieutenant Commander Kate Fisher, stationed aboard the reconnaissance ship UES Falcon, transmitted real-time intelligence about the Vorkath assault. The enemy had deployed orbital bombardment platforms around the Zephyrian homeworld and was systematically destroying every underwater city they could. Kate's reports painted a picture of methodical genocide. The Vorkath were not interested in conquest or negotiation. They wanted the rare trilithium deposits beneath the Zephyrian oceans, and they were willing to exterminate an entire species to get them. Every hour brought news of more cities destroyed, more millions of innocent beings killed by weapons designed to boil water and melt coral. The politicians were divided and afraid. Senator Bill Crawford from the Colonial Affairs Committee reminded everyone that Earth had no formal alliance with the Zephyrians and no legal obligation to risk human lives for an alien species. The Vorkath Empire was powerful enough to threaten Earth itself if provoked, and humanity was not ready for that kind of war. But as the arguments continued, another message arrived that changed everything. It came from a young Zephyrian survivor named Current of Hope, one of the few children who had escaped the destruction of the great city called Harmony of Depths. The message was simple, transmitted in patterns of light that Dr. Adams translated with tears streaming down his face. The child had learned about Earth from cultural exchanges before the war began, and she knew that humans had once had great sea creatures called whales that sang beautiful songs across the oceans. Those whales had been hunted to near extinction before humans learned to protect them, and their songs had been lost forever from Earth's seas. Current of Hope's message was heartbreaking in its innocence. Please don't let us become extinct like the songs of ancient Earth whales. We want to keep singing for the universe." The conference room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of those words. Here was a child facing the end of her entire species, and her greatest fear was not death but the thought that her people's beauty would be lost forever, just like the whale songs that humans had failed to save. Admiral Wright looked around the table at the faces of Earth's leaders. She saw fear and uncertainty, but she also saw something else. She saw the same quality that had driven humans to explore the stars in the first place: the stubborn refusal to accept that some things could not be changed. General Morgan was already pulling up fleet deployment schedules before Admiral Wright spoke. Dr. Adams was calculating travel times to the Kepler 442 system. Even Senator Crawford was nodding slowly, understanding that some decisions went beyond politics and treaties. Carol Wright made the decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. She activated Protocol 7, the emergency mobilization order that had never been used in the 200 years since it was written. Every human ship capable of mounting weapons would be called to service. Every colony would contribute whatever vessels they could spare. For the first time in human history, Earth would go to war not for territory or resources, but for the simple principle that genocide was wrong. The orders went out across human space within the hour. Captain Alex Turner was loading cargo containers on his freighter Midnight Express when the military conscription notice appeared on his screen. Dr. Helen Clark was studying stellar formations from her research vessel Aurora when the call came for her to report to Luna, base for weapon installation. Even luxury cruise captain Steve Harrison received orders to convert his passenger liner Stellar Princess into a military transport. Mining ships, exploration vessels, corporate security fleets, and private yachts all received the same message. Earth was mobilizing everything that could fly and fight. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Ship captains across human space began plotting courses for Luna Base, where Admiral Garcia was frantically organizing the largest fleet assembly in human history. Engineers worked around the clock to install weapons on civilian vessels. Cargo haulers became missile platforms. Research ships turned into electronic warfare platforms, and even personal spacecraft were fitted with whatever armaments could be found. Word of Earth's mobilization spread beyond human space through the galactic communication networks. Dozens of alien species that had suffered under Vorkath aggression began offering covert support. The Andromedans provided updated star charts and intelligence about Vorkath fleet movements. The Centauri Republic shared technical specifications for energy weapons that could penetrate Vorkath armor. As ships continued to arrive at Luna Base, Admiral Wright realized that something unprecedented was happening. Earth was not just sending its military to war, but its entire civilization. Farmers who had never left their home systems, scientists who studied peaceful phenomena, merchants who traded in luxury goods, all of them were volunteering to risk everything for a species they had never met. The impossible promise that Jake Sullivan had made to the Zephyrians was becoming reality, but the cost would be measured in human lives and the future of Earth itself. Luna Base had never seen anything like the massive fleet assembly that began within days of Admiral Wright's mobilization order. Ships arrived from every corner of human space, creating a traffic jam of vessels that stretched from Earth's moon all the way to the asteroid belt. Admiral Tony Garcia stood in the command center watching displays that showed over 600 ships of every possible design and purpose gathering for humanity's greatest military operation, Captain Alex Turner's cargo freighter. Midnight Express looked nothing like the peaceful merchant vessel it had been just a week before. Military technicians had installed missile pods between the shipping containers, turning the cargo holds into weapons bays. Alex watched nervously as engineers explained how to fire the new armaments, knowing that his ship had never been designed for combat and probably would not survive a real battle. Dr. Helen Clark faced the same transformation aboard her research vessel Aurora. The delicate scientific instruments that had spent years studying distant stars were being replaced with military-grade sensors and targeting computers. Helen struggled to understand the new equipment while trying to maintain the ship's original purpose as a mobile laboratory, but she knew that science would have to wait while an entire species faced extinction. The luxury cruise liner Stellar Princess presented unique challenges for the military conversion teams. Captain Steve Harrison's ship was designed to carry wealthy passengers in comfort, not to fight space battles. But the engineers found creative solutions, hiding weapon systems behind decorative panels and converting the elegant dining halls into strategic command centers. Throughout the growing fleet, similar transformations were taking place. Mining vessels like the Deep Digger became improvised bombers. Their ore-crushing equipment adapted to deliver devastating attacks against enemy armor. Exploration ships traded their peaceful scientific missions for reconnaissance and electronic warfare duties. Even personal yachts belonging to wealthy colonists were fitted with whatever weapons could be mounted on their small frames. The logistics of feeding and supplying such a diverse fleet challenged every aspect of Earth's military organization. Supply ships struggled to deliver the right ammunition to vessels that had never been designed to use it. Medical teams worked frantically to set up field hospitals that could treat injuries from weapons and situations they had never encountered before. Admiral Garcia coordinated the chaos from Luna Base, knowing that every day of delay meant more Zephyrian deaths in the Kepler 442 system. Intelligence reports from Lieutenant Commander Kate Fisher painted an increasingly desperate picture as the Vorkath intensified their attacks on the remaining underwater cities. Captain Danny Mitchell arrived at Luna Base commanding the heavy cruiser UES Titan, one of Earth's few dedicated warships. His crew had trained for years in space combat, but even they were overwhelmed by the scale of the operation developing around them. Military protocols designed for small fleet actions had to be completely rewritten to accommodate hundreds of civilian vessels with no combat. Experienced Dr. Ben Adams worked with military planners to develop new tactical approaches that could take advantage of the fleet's unusual composition. Traditional space combat relied on large ships fighting in organized formations, but the human fleet consisted mainly of small, fast vessels that could not survive direct confrontation with Vorkath heavy cruisers. The solution came from studying how the Vorkath themselves fought. Intelligence officer Lieutenant Amy Roberts had spent years analyzing enemy tactics and discovered that the insectoid race relied heavily on predictable patterns and centralized command structures. Their ships fought in geometric formations that maximized firepower but reduced flexibility. Captain Nick Barnes of the converted research vessel Newton proposed a radical new strategy based on swarm tactics. Instead of fighting like a traditional navy, the human fleet would attack like a cloud of angry insects, with small groups of ships hitting the enemy from multiple directions simultaneously. The plan was risky and chaotic, but it offered the only chance for success against superior numbers and firepower. As the fleet prepared for departure, word of Earth's mobilization continued to spread throughout the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humans before began to take notice of the unprecedented military buildup. The Vorkath Empire itself received reports of the growing human fleet, but Admiral Ryan Porter dismissed the threat as insignificant compared to his own 800 warships. The diversity of the human response amazed even the aliens who were helping them. The Andromedans had expected Earth to send a traditional military force, but instead they saw farmers flying armed tractors, scientists commanding weapon-laden laboratories, and business executives leading converted corporate fleets into battle. Captain Greg Thompson's stealth destroyer, Shadow, arrived from the Outer Rim colonies carrying intelligence that would prove crucial to the coming battle. His ship's advanced sensors had detected weaknesses in Vorkath fleet coordination, particularly their reliance on a single command vessel to direct the entire force. Medical preparations for the fleet required extraordinary measures. Dr. Laura Young commanded a flotilla of hospital ships that had been hastily converted from passenger liners and cargo vessels. Her medical teams prepared for casualties on a scale that human medicine had never faced before, knowing that the unique nature of Vorkath weapons would create injuries they had only studied in theory. Marine Commander Paul Davis faced the challenge of preparing ground assault troops for potential boarding actions against enemy ships. His soldiers would have to fight in alien environments against creatures whose biology and psychology were completely foreign to human experience. The final preparations included establishing communication protocols that could coordinate hundreds of ships with different equipment and capabilities. Standard military communication systems had to be adapted to work with civilian vessels that used completely different technologies. As departure time approached, Admiral Wright addressed the assembled fleet commanders in a broadcast that reached every ship in the massive Armada. She spoke simply about the choice that humanity faced: to remain safe while an innocent species died, or to risk everything for the principle that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. The response from the fleet was immediate and unanimous. Ship after ship reported ready for departure, their crews prepared to travel across the galaxy to fight for beings they had never met. The transformation was complete. Earth's greatest armada was ready to answer the Zephyrian call for help. Captain Lisa Martinez aboard the diplomatic vessel, Harmony continued to receive desperate updates from the Zephyrian survivors. The beautiful aquatic civilization that had taken millennia to develop was being systematically destroyed. But hope remained alive in the messages that reached the human fleet. The journey to Kepler 442 would take 3 weeks, and every day would bring new challenges as the diverse fleet learned to work together. But as the massive armada finally departed Luna Base, one thing was certain: the galaxy would never see anything like it again. The human armada stretched across space like a metallic river, 600 ships of every conceivable design moving together toward the Kepler 442 system. Admiral Carol Wright stood on the bridge of the flagship UES Enterprise, watching the tactical displays that showed the most diverse military fleet in galactic history. Massive cargo haulers flew alongside sleek military destroyers. Research vessels traveled next to luxury cruise ships, and mining barges kept pace with diplomatic escorts. The journey would take 3 weeks, and every day brought new challenges as the fleet learned to operate as a unified force. Captain Nick Barnes of the converted research vessel Newton worked tirelessly to develop tactical formations that could accommodate vessels ranging from tiny personal yachts to enormous cargo carriers. The traditional military approach of organized battle lines simply would not work with such a varied collection of ships. The Einstein solution emerged gradually as the fleet practiced maneuvers during their long journey through hyperspace. Instead of fighting like a conventional navy, the humans would attack like a swarm of predators, using their superior numbers and unpredictable movements to confuse and overwhelm the enemy. Small groups of ships would coordinate attacks from multiple directions, forcing the Vorkath to split their attention and weakening their defensive formations. Captain Alex Turner's cargo freighter, Midnight Express, proved surprisingly effective in the new tactical system. The massive ship could carry enough missiles to destroy several enemy vessels, but its slow speed meant it needed protection from faster escorts. Dr. Helen Clark's research vessel Aurora became the electronic warfare center for Turner's group, using its advanced sensors to provide targeting data and coordinate attacks. Back in the Kepler 442 system, Commander Jake Sullivan and his diplomatic vessel Harmony continued their desperate mission to buy time for the approaching human fleet. The small ship played a deadly game of hide-and-seek with Vorkath patrol vessels, using its superior speed and knowledge of the system to stay one step ahead of destruction. Captain Lisa Martinez worked with Zephyrian Commander Reef Singer Bluecurrent to establish hidden refugee camps in the asteroid belt surrounding the system. Thousands of Zephyrian survivors had escaped the destruction of their underwater cities, but they needed constant protection from Vorkath search parties that hunted them like animals. The Vorkath were growing impatient with the slow progress of their genocide. Admiral Ryan Porter had expected the Zephyrian resistance to collapse within weeks, but the arrival of the human diplomatic vessel had somehow given the aliens new hope and determination. Every day that passed meant more resources, spent on the occupation and more pressure from the Vorkath High Command to complete the mission. Porter decided to accelerate his timeline and began deploying planet-killer weapons around the Zephyrian homeworld. These massive devices could boil entire oceans or crack planetary crusts, and their use would guarantee the complete destruction of every living thing on the planet. The beautiful aquatic cities that had taken thousands of years to grow would be reduced to radioactive ash within hours. As the human fleet continued its journey, long-range scouts began detecting the edge of the Kepler 442 system and the massive Vorkath presence waiting there. Captain Greg Thompson's stealth destroyer Shadow penetrated deep into enemy territory, using its advanced cloaking systems to gather intelligence on the opposing force. The reports that came back were sobering. The Vorkath fleet consisted of 800 ships arranged in perfect geometric formations around the Zephyrian homeworld. Their vessels were larger and more heavily armed than anything in the human fleet, with energy shields that could deflect most conventional weapons. The enemy had positioned their ships to create overlapping fields of fire that would make any direct assault suicidal. But Thompson's reconnaissance also revealed a critical weakness in the Vorkath battle plan. The insectoid race's reliance on centralized command meant that their entire fleet was coordinated by a single massive command ship at the center of their formation. If that vessel could be destroyed or disabled, the entire Vorkath force would lose its ability to fight as a unified army. The human fleet spent the remaining days of their journey preparing for the most complex battle plan in military history. Admiral Wright and her staff worked to coordinate hundreds of different ship types and capabilities into a coherent assault strategy. Every vessel would have a specific role to play, from the smallest scouts to the largest cargo haulers. Captain Danny Mitchell's heavy cruiser UES Titan would lead the direct assault on the Vorkath command ship, supported by the few other military vessels in the fleet. But the real key to victory would be the chaos created by hundreds of civilian ships attacking from unpredictable directions, forcing the enemy to divide their attention and creating openings for the main assault. Medical officer Dr. Laura Young prepared her hospital ships for massive casualties, knowing that many of the civilian vessels would not survive their first encounter with Vorkath weapons. The converted luxury liner Stellar Princess had been equipped with the most advanced medical facilities available. But Captain Steve Harrison knew that his elegant passenger ship was about to become a floating emergency room. Marine Commander Paul Davis briefed his troops for potential boarding actions, though everyone knew that fighting inside a Vorkath vessel would be like entering an alien nightmare. The insectoid warriors were larger and stronger than humans, with natural armor and acidic weapons that could melt through most protection. As the fleet approached the final jump point before entering the Kepler 442 system, Admiral Wright broadcast a message to every ship in the Armada. She spoke about the choice that had brought them across the galaxy, the decision to risk everything for beings they had never met simply because it was the right thing to do. The response from the fleet was overwhelming. Ship after ship reported ready for battle, their crews prepared to face odds that any rational analysis would consider hopeless. Farmers who had never fired a weapon in anger stood alongside professional soldiers. Scientists who studied peaceful phenomena prepared to use their knowledge for war. Business executives who had spent their lives in comfortable offices readied themselves to command vessels in the largest space. Battle in Galactic History, Intelligence. Updates from Jake Sullivan's team painted an increasingly desperate picture of the situation in the system. The Vorkath had begun their final assault on the remaining Zephyrian cities, using their planet-killer weapons to turn the beautiful ocean world into a toxic wasteland. Every hour of delay meant more innocent deaths and less chance that anything would be left to save. But there was also hope in the Zephyrian messages that reached the approaching human fleet. The aquatic beings had learned of the Armada coming to their aid, and their bioluminescent communications spoke of joy and gratitude that someone had finally answered their call for help. Children who had never known anything but war were learning that the universe contained beings who would cross the galaxy to protect strangers, as the human fleet prepared for its final jump into the Kepler 442 system. Everyone understood that they were about to attempt something unprecedented in galactic history. Never before had a single species risked so much for another, with no expectation of reward or alliance. The outcome would determine not just the fate of the Zephyrians, but humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. The battle for the Zephyrian homeworld was about to begin, and the universe would never be the same. The Battle of Kepler 442 began with humanity doing what it did best, the impossible. Instead of approaching the Vorkath fleet in traditional military formations, the human armada exploded into the system like a storm made of metal and fire. 600 ships scattered in every direction, their chaotic movements confusing the enemy sensors that had been designed to track predictable battle patterns. Captain Alex Turner's converted cargo hauler, Midnight Express, led the charge with a cargo hold full of improvised missiles. The massive freighter lumbered toward the enemy lines like an angry whale, absorbing enemy fire with its thick hull while launching everything it carried at the nearest Vorkath cruisers. 3 enemy ships exploded before their commanders realized that the harmless civilian vessel posed a deadly threat. Dr. Helen Clark's research vessel, Aurora, had become the electronic warfare hub for Turner's attack group. Her ship's powerful sensors, originally designed to study distant stars, now provided precise targeting data for the human assault. The elegant scientific instruments tracked enemy movements and transmitted coordinates to dozens of attacking vessels, turning peaceful exploration technology into a weapon of war. The Vorkath fleet struggled to respond to the unprecedented attack. Admiral Ryan Porter had prepared for conventional space warfare, with organized formations and predictable tactics. Instead, he faced complete chaos as human ships attacked from seemingly impossible angles. Mining vessels dove through his defensive lines like armored meteors. Luxury cruise ships provided covering fire for military destroyers, and research vessels coordinated electronic attacks that disrupted his communication systems. Captain Danny Mitchell's heavy cruiser UES Titan pushed through the enemy formation toward the massive Vorkath command ship at the center of their fleet. The military vessel was designed for this kind of fighting, its thick armor and powerful weapons allowing it to survive the concentrated fire of multiple enemy ships. But Mitchell knew that his success depended on the chaos being created by hundreds of civilian vessels around him. The most unlikely hero of the battle proved to be Captain Steve Harrison and his converted luxury liner Stellar Princess. The elegant passenger ship had been transformed into a mobile command center, its spacious ballrooms now filled with tactical displays and communication equipment. Harrison coordinated the attacks of dozens of small vessels, while his ship's improvised weapons provided covering fire for more vulnerable craft. Captain Nick Barnes's research vessel, Newton, used its converted mining lasers to devastating effect against enemy armor. The powerful industrial equipment, designed to cut through asteroids, proved capable of slicing through Vorkath hull plating like paper. His ship danced between enemy vessels, using its superior maneuverability to strike and retreat before the larger enemy ships could respond. The turning point came when Captain Greg Thompson's stealth destroyer Shadow penetrated the Vorkath defensive perimeter and launched a precision strike against their command vessel. The small, fast ship used its cloaking systems to approach undetected, then fired everything it had at the massive enemy flagship. The attack created a critical breach in the command ship's hull, disrupting the communication systems that coordinated the entire Vorkath fleet. Without their centralized command structure, the Vorkath formation began to collapse. Individual ship commanders found themselves unable to coordinate with their neighbors, leading to confusion and friendly fire incidents. Some vessels turned to retreat while others continued fighting, creating gaps in their defensive lines that the human ships exploited ruthlessly. Commander Jake Sullivan's diplomatic vessel Harmony, the ship that had first answered the Zephyrian call for help, delivered the final blow to the enemy flagship. The small vessel had survived 3 weeks of hide-and-seek warfare in the system, and its crew knew every weakness in the massive command ship's defenses. A single, precisely placed torpedo penetrated the damaged hull and detonated inside the enemy vessel's command center. The explosion that destroyed Admiral Porter and his staff sent shockwaves through the remaining Vorkath fleet. Without leadership or coordination, the surviving enemy ships began a desperate retreat toward the edge of the system. Some vessels tried to surrender, while others attempted to ram human ships in final acts of desperate violence. Captain Lisa Martinez coordinated with Zephyrian survivors throughout the battle, providing real-time updates on the human assault and ensuring that refugee groups remained hidden from retreating enemy forces. The aquatic beings watched in amazement as their impossible rescuers turned the tide of a war that had seemed hopeless just hours before. As the last Vorkath ships disappeared into hyperspace, the human fleet began the enormous task of damage assessment and rescue operations. Nearly 100 human vessels had been destroyed or severely damaged in the battle, with thousands of crew members killed or wounded. Dr. Laura Young's hospital ships worked frantically to treat the injured, their converted passenger facilities overwhelmed by the scale of the casualties, but the victory was complete. The Vorkath occupation force had been utterly destroyed, their planet-killer weapons disabled before they could complete the genocide of the Zephyrian species. The beautiful aquatic world below began to show signs of recovery as the toxic weapons dissipated and the surviving population emerged from hiding. Commander Reefsinger Bluecurrent transmitted a message that spread throughout the galaxy within hours. Her bioluminescent words painted pictures of gratitude and wonder that even non-aquatic species could understand. She spoke of hope returning to a dying world, of children who would grow up free because strangers from a distant planet had risked everything to save them. The message that resonated across the galaxy was simple but profound. They believed no one would answer our call for help. Then Earth's greatest armada arrived, Not just their warriors, but their merchants, their scientists, their explorers. They came not as conquerors, but as those who answer when others cry out in darkness. News of the human victory spread faster than the ships that had won it. Species throughout the galaxy learned that Earth had mobilized its entire civilization to save a people they had never met, risking everything for the simple principle that genocide was wrong. The Andromedans, who had secretly supported the human effort, openly declared their alliance with Earth. The Centauri Republic offered formal treaties of friendship and mutual defense. Even former enemies reconsidered their positions toward humanity. The brutal efficiency of the human assault had impressed military commanders throughout the galaxy, but it was the reason for the war that truly changed everything. Earth had proven that it would fight not for territory or resources, but for moral principles that transcended species boundaries. Admiral Carol Wright's final battle report became one of the most studied documents in galactic military history. She wrote about the transformation of ordinary civilians into heroes, about the power of unified purpose in the face of overwhelming odds, about the strength that came from fighting for something greater than personal survival. The Zephyrian homeworld slowly began to heal under human protection. Engineers from Earth worked alongside aquatic specialists to repair the damaged underwater cities, while medical teams treated the survivors of Vorkath chemical weapons. The beautiful coral structures that had been thought lost forever were carefully restored, their bioluminescent art once again telling stories of peace and wonder. Captain Alex Turner returned to his cargo hauling business, but the Midnight Express now carried more than commercial freight. His ship had become a symbol of human determination, and he found himself delivering supplies to newly liberated worlds throughout the galaxy. The missiles pods had been removed, but the memories of their use would inspire stories for generations. Dr. Helen Clark resumed her scientific research, but the Aurora's mission had expanded beyond pure exploration. Her ship now served as a mobile laboratory for studying the effects of war on alien ecosystems, helping other species recover from conflicts like the one that had nearly destroyed the Zephyrians. The Battle of Kepler 442 established humanity as a major power in galactic politics. But more importantly, it demonstrated Earth's greatest strength, the willingness to risk everything for those who could not protect themselves. When an innocent species called out to an empty universe for help, Earth had answered with everything it had. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would humanity. They had learned that their greatest victories came not from conquering others, but from protecting them. The Armada that had saved the Zephyrians became the foundation for a new kind of military force, one that existed not to expand human territory, but to defend the defenseless wherever they might be found. In the years that followed, when species facing extinction sent desperate calls into the void, they no longer believed that no one would answer. They knew that somewhere among the stars Earth was listening, and its greatest armada was always ready to respond.